When the townspeople of Cedar Ridge finally discovered why Jonas Mitchell had been giving away his entire store inventory for free every month for 15 years, they realized that the eccentric shopkeeper they'd all pitted as a failed businessman had actually been conducting the most important rescue operation in frontier history. His hidden motive had saved an entire generation from a fate worse than death, and the secret he'd been protecting was buried in the very soil beneath their feet. Jonas Mitchell had arrived in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, in the spring of 1868, carrying a modest inheritance from his deceased father and dreams of establishing a successful general store in the growing mining community. At 32 years old, Jonas was an experienced merchant who had learned the trade, working in his family's store back in Ohio before the Civil War had changed everything. He understood how to manage inventory, negotiate with suppliers, and build the kind of customer relationships that made small businesses thrive in frontier communities. Cedar Ridge was exactly the kind of place where an ambitious merchant could build a prosperous life. The town of nearly 2,000 residents was supported by 3 productive silver mines that employed hundreds of workers and attracted a steady stream of new families seeking opportunities in the Colorado Territory. The existing general store had burned down the previous winter, leaving the community without a reliable source of basic supplies and creating a perfect opportunity for an enterprising businessman to establish himself as an essential part of the local economy. Jonas's store quickly became the commercial heart of Cedar Ridge, offering everything from basic foodstuffs and household supplies to tools, clothing, and the patent medicines that frontier families relied on to treat common ailments. He was a fair and honest merchant who charged reasonable prices, extended credit to families experiencing temporary hardships, and made special efforts to ensure that even the poorest residents could afford basic necessities. Within 2 years, Mitchell's General Store was not just a business, but a community institution that played a vital role in the daily lives of everyone in Cedar Ridge. But in 1870, Jonas began to notice troubling patterns in the health of Cedar Ridge's children that made him question everything he thought he knew about his adopted community. It started with subtle observations during his daily interactions with customers. Children who seemed unusually tired and listless. Young people who developed mysterious ailments that didn't respond to traditional treatments, and an increasing number of families seeking remedies for symptoms that didn't fit any recognizable medical conditions. Jonas's concern deepened when he began keeping informal records of the health complaints he heard from customers and the remedies they purchased from his store. The patterns he documented were disturbing and consistent. Children throughout Cedar Ridge were developing neurological symptoms, learning difficulties, and physical problems that suggested exposure to some kind of environmental toxin. Most alarming of all, these symptoms were becoming more severe and more widespread with each passing month. The breakthrough in Jonas's understanding came when he received a visit from Dr. Elizabeth Carson, a traveling physician who had been educated at one of the finest medical colleges in the East and who possessed knowledge of environmental health that was decades ahead of its time. Dr. Carson had been conducting a survey of health conditions in mining communities throughout the Colorado Territory, and her findings in Cedar Ridge had prompted her to investigate possible environmental causes for the unusual medical problems she had observed. Dr. Carson's examination of soil and water samples from around Cedar Ridge revealed the presence of heavy metals and toxic compounds that were being released by the mining operations and gradually accumulating in the environment where children played, lived, and attended school. The contamination was particularly concentrated in areas where families obtained their drinking water and where local merchants purchased the agricultural products that formed the basis of the frontier diet. More disturbing still, Dr. Carson's investigation revealed that the contamination was not accidental, but was the result of deliberate cost-cutting measures by the mining companies, who had chosen to dispose of toxic waste in ways that saved money but endangered public health. The mine owners were aware that their practices were causing environmental damage, But they had calculated that the economic benefits of cheap waste disposal outweighed the risks to the community that depended on their operations for employment and prosperity. Dr. Carson's findings presented Jonas with a moral crisis that would define the rest of his life. If he reported the contamination to territorial authorities, the resulting investigation would likely force the mines to close, destroying the economic foundation of Cedar Ridge and leaving hundreds of families without income or homes. But if he remained silent, an entire generation of children would continue to be exposed to toxins that would cause lifelong health problems and potentially premature death. The solution that Jonas ultimately developed was as brilliant as it was personally costly. If he couldn't safely expose the contamination without destroying the community, he would use his position as the town's primary merchant to provide every family with access to clean food, pure water, and uncontaminated supplies that could protect their children from further exposure, while he worked to find a long-term solution to the environmental crisis. Jonas began his rescue operation by quietly changing his purchasing practices to ensure that all food items, medicines, and household supplies sold in his store came from sources outside the contaminated region. He established relationships with suppliers in distant territories, personally inspected shipments to verify their quality and purity, and absorbed the enormous additional costs of transportation and premium products without passing these expenses on to his customers. But simply providing clean supplies wasn't enough to protect the children who had already been exposed to dangerous levels of contamination. Working with Dr. Carson, who had agreed to maintain the secrecy of their operation, Jonas began stocking specialized medicines and nutritional supplements that could help children's bodies eliminate accumulated toxins and recover from the damage they had already suffered. The challenge was distributing these life-saving products to the families who needed them most without revealing the true purpose of his efforts or creating suspicions that might lead to questions about environmental conditions in Cedar Ridge. Jonas solved this problem by implementing what appeared to be a series of increasingly generous customer service policies that actually served as cover for his systematic distribution of medical countermeasures. First, Jonas began offering free samples of new products to families with children, claiming that he wanted to build customer loyalty by allowing people to try items before making purchasing decisions. These samples were actually carefully calculated doses of supplements and medicines designed to counteract specific types of toxic exposure. Next, he implemented a customer loyalty program that provided free merchandise to families who made regular purchases, ensuring that protective products continued to reach households on a consistent basis. As the contamination crisis deepened and more children began showing serious symptoms, Jonas made the decision that would define his legacy and consume his personal fortune. In 1873, he posted a simple handwritten sign outside his store: "Everything free. Take what you need." From that day forward, Jonas Mitchell gave away his entire inventory every month, restocking with clean, safe products purchased with his own money and distributed without charge to every family in Cedar Ridge. The townspeople's initial reaction to Jonas's announcement was a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and concern for his mental health. Most assumed that he had suffered some kind of breakdown or had made a temporary decision based on religious conviction or personal tragedy. When weeks turned into months and Jonas continued his policy of free distribution, the community concluded that he was simply a bad businessman who was too generous for his own good and who would eventually be forced to abandon his impractical approach to commerce. What the townspeople didn't understand was that Jonas's failed business model was actually the most sophisticated public health intervention in frontier America. Every item distributed from his store had been carefully selected for its ability to provide protection against environmental contamination. The food was sourced from uncontaminated regions. The water was purified through processes that Jonas had learned from Dr. Carson, and medicines were specifically chosen for their ability to help children's bodies recover from toxic exposure. Jonas's operation required not just enormous financial resources, but also incredible operational complexity. He had to coordinate with suppliers across multiple territories to ensure a steady flow of clean products, arrange for specialized transportation that could maintain the purity of sensitive items, and manage distribution logistics that ensured every family received appropriate products without creating suspicions about the true purpose of his efforts. The personal cost of Jonas's mission was staggering. Within 5 years, he had exhausted his inheritance, sold all of his personal possessions, and borrowed money against future earnings that he knew he would never receive. He lived in a single room behind his store, ate the simplest possible meals, and wore the same clothes until they fell apart. Every dollar he could save was invested in purchasing and distributing the supplies that were protecting Cedar Ridge's children from permanent disability or death. But the results of Jonas's sacrifice were undeniable. By 1878, 5 years after he had begun giving away free supplies, the health of Cedar Ridge's children had improved dramatically. The neurological symptoms that had been epidemic in the early 1870s had largely disappeared. Learning difficulties were becoming less common, and the overall vitality and development of young people was markedly better than in neighboring communities that faced similar environmental challenges. The success of Jonas's intervention was so complete that it created a new problem. The stark contrast between the health of Cedar Ridge's children and the deteriorating condition of young people in other mining communities was beginning to attract attention from territorial health authorities. Dr. Carson, who had continued to monitor the situation, warned Jonas that his success was so remarkable that it risked exposing the very contamination he had been working to conceal. The crisis came to a head in 1883. When a territorial health inspector arrived in Cedar Ridge to investigate reports of unusually good health outcomes in a community that should have been experiencing the same problems as other mining towns. The inspector's presence threatened to uncover not only the environmental contamination, but also Jonas's illegal operation of an unlicensed medical distribution network that violated numerous territorial regulations. Jonas's response to this crisis demonstrated the full extent of his commitment to protecting the community he had served for 15 years. Rather than risk exposure that might end his operation and leave the children vulnerable, he arranged to have himself arrested on charges of operating an illegal business and distributing unlicensed medical products. By accepting criminal prosecution, Jonas drew attention away from the environmental issues and created a legal framework that would allow him to continue his work under official supervision. The trial of Jonas Mitchell became a sensation throughout the Colorado Territory as prosecutors struggled to explain why a man should be punished for giving away products that had clearly benefited his community. Jonas refused to provide any defense for his actions, accepting full responsibility for violating business regulations while carefully avoiding any testimony that might reveal the true reasons for his unusual practices. The judge, faced with the impossible task of punishing a man whose crimes had consisted of helping children, sentenced Jonas to time served and ordered him to cease his unlicensed distribution activities. But the judge also arranged for the establishment of a territorial health clinic in Cedar Ridge, staffed by Dr. Carson and funded through a special appropriation that would allow the continuation of the medical interventions that had proven so effective. The official establishment of the health clinic allowed Jonas to transition from illegal distribution to legitimate cooperation with territorial health authorities. Dr. Carson was finally able to document and report the environmental contamination that had threatened Cedar Ridge's children, leading to new regulations for mining waste disposal and cleanup efforts that addressed the root causes of the health crisis. But by the time the environmental problems were officially acknowledged and addressed, Jonas Mitchell had spent nearly 20 years and his entire personal fortune protecting a generation of children from harm. He had given away hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of supplies, had sacrificed his health and financial security, and had risked imprisonment to ensure that the young people of Cedar Ridge could grow up healthy and strong. The true scope of Jonas's achievement became clear only after his death in 1888, when territorial health authorities conducted a comprehensive study of health outcomes in Colorado mining communities. The children who had grown up in Cedar Ridge during Jonas's years of free distribution had dramatically lower rates of neurological disorders, learning disabilities, and chronic health problems compared to their peers in other mining towns. They were taller, stronger, and more intellectually capable than young people who had been exposed to similar environmental hazards without the protection that Jonas had provided. The study also revealed the sophisticated nature of Jonas's intervention. His selection of products, timing of distribution, and coordination with medical expertise had created a public health program that was more effective than anything being implemented by official government agencies. His methods became a model for environmental health interventions in other contaminated communities throughout the American West. Perhaps most remarkably, the study found that the benefits of Jonas's intervention had extended beyond the children he had directly protected. The improved health of Cedar Ridge's young people had created a more educated, more productive, and more innovative community that attracted investment and development opportunities that other mining towns could not compete for. Jonas's sacrifice had not only saved individual lives, but it also ensured the long-term prosperity and survival of the entire community. The children who had been protected by Jonas's intervention grew up to become the leaders, professionals, and entrepreneurs who transformed Cedar Ridge from a dangerous mining camp into a thriving territorial center. They established schools that attracted the finest teachers, built businesses that served markets throughout the region, and created cultural institutions that made their community a model for other frontier towns. When the surviving recipients of Jonas's charity learned the true nature of his sacrifice, they established a memorial fund that provided education and medical care for children in other communities facing environmental health challenges. The Jonas Mitchell Foundation became one of the most important charitable organizations in the Colorado Territory, extending his legacy of protecting vulnerable children throughout the American West. The general store building where Jonas had conducted his remarkable operation was preserved as a monument to his memory and to the principle that individual sacrifice could create lasting change for entire communities. Territorial authorities designated it as an official historical site, and visitors from throughout the region came to learn about the man who had given away everything he owned to protect children he barely knew. The environmental contamination that had prompted Jonas's intervention was eventually cleaned up through mining industry reforms and territorial regulations that made Cedar Ridge one of the first communities in the American West to achieve full environmental remediation. But the cleanup was only possible because Jonas had protected the community's children long enough for political and legal solutions to be developed and implemented. Dr. Elizabeth Carson, who had worked with Jonas throughout his years of service, documented their collaboration in a medical journal that became required reading for public health officials throughout the United States. Her account of Jonas's methods and achievements established new standards for community-based health interventions and demonstrated that committed individuals could accomplish public health goals that government agencies had been unable to achieve. The story of Jonas Mitchell also inspired new legislation at the territorial and federal levels that required mining companies to bear financial responsibility for environmental cleanup and health monitoring in communities affected by their operations. These laws, known as the Mitchell Provisions, established precedents for environmental protection that influenced American industrial policy for decades to come. But perhaps the most important legacy of Jonas's work was the example he set for future generations about the power of individual moral courage to create lasting change. His willingness to sacrifice his personal comfort, financial security, and social standing to protect children demonstrated that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they were motivated by genuine compassion and unwavering determination. The children of Cedar Ridge who had been saved by Jonas's intervention never forgot the debt they owed to the quiet merchant who had given away everything he owned to ensure their health and future prosperity. They passed down the story of his sacrifice to their own children and grandchildren, creating a tradition of community service and environmental stewardship that influenced the development of the entire region. Jonas Mitchell died as he had lived, quietly and without seeking recognition for his extraordinary achievements. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by his generosity, but few of them understood the full scope of what he had accomplished until years later when the true nature of his mission was finally revealed. The epitaph on Jonas's gravestone, written by the children he had saved, reads simply, "He gave everything so that we could have everything." But those words only hint at the remarkable story of a man who had transformed apparent business failure into the greatest public health success in frontier history, proving that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate for ourselves, but in what we sacrifice for others. The general store owner who had seemed to be the worst businessman in Cedar Ridge had actually been the community's greatest hero, a man whose apparent failures had been carefully calculated successes that saved an entire generation from suffering and created a legacy of health, prosperity, and hope that would endure for generations to come. If you're enjoying these incredible, true stories of hidden heroism and extraordinary sacrifice, hit that subscribe button because we've got many more tales of ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things waiting for you. Click on the video on your screen to hear another story about someone who discovered that true success is measured not by what we gain for ourselves, but by what we give to protect those who cannot protect themselves.